Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Chris Usserman, the Chief Technologist for Infoblox Public Sector, and Bill Lemons, the Director of Systems Engineering for Fortinet Federal. Thank you both for taking the time. January will be 3 years since OMB released its federal zero trust architecture strategy, requiring agencies to reach some level of maturity by the end of fiscal 2024. As agencies continue down that path, it's a never-ending journey. The DoD, for example, set the deadline of achieving target levels of zero trust, which is 91 activities by 2027. But as agencies are going down that path, where are you seeing a lot of their focus? What has been successful and what maybe hasn't worked?
Okay. Yeah, I'll take an approach of what we're seeing as well as what we're doing, right? There's a lot of attention to identity and focusing on that as a core component of zero trust and making sure that that's all set in a foundational way to help support those efforts moving forward. We're not specifically directly involved in that per se, but definitely we see a lot of action from agencies that we work with in that area. One of the areas that we do spend a lot of time is in infrastructure modernization. So there's been a lot of attention in trying to make sure that they wrap up any modernization or transition, whether that's just a programmatic transition or a carrier transition from one to another, to ensure that the infrastructure in place is of a modernized nature and able to support and work in conjunction with zero trust principles moving forward. And then the last thing that I wanted to comment on with regards to this is taking a look at some of the as a service platforms to assist and kind of move organizations down in the zero trust realm, if you will. We've seen a number of organizations take some steps toward pilot programs and things of that nature, limited implementations, and providing feedback with regards to the success or failure associated with those.
Yeah, obviously a lot of focus on ICAM. Chris, how about you?
Sure. I mean, Bill covered that quite well. And in addition to that, I think there's one of the challenges that's both positive and a negative is the speed of government, right? Oftentimes that can be whatever you want it to be. It can be very slow, as some people will understand and know, and the bureaucracy of all of that. But part of that actually is that in taking that course of action, there's the understanding of exactly what does zero trust mean to each independent agency. And that's been the biggest challenge for probably the first year of the last 3 years is what does zero trust mean to me in my agency and my organization? And so what we've seen is, developing a plan of execution, bolstering what they've already been doing, and identifying and forecasting the budget needs, because most of the time, when this first came out 3 years ago, there wasn't money that came with it. And with the POM cycle that happens, you're now looking at 2 years down the road. So we're just now seeing the results of that first year's worth of effort that are starting to come into play. The other aspect of it, kind of more tactically, is from a what hasn't worked perspective, is the idea of from a vendor perspective is a lot of times there's the name aspect where agencies will trust and believe that, it's like, hey, we'll go with this because, yeah, we do that. We do zero trust, or we are zero trust, without actually understanding or evaluating those technologies or those solutions for their needs within and their applicability within that government agency's environment. And so, that's part of it, is taking that step back and understanding, does this really meet my needs moving forward?
And let me follow up on that. Could you expand on exactly agencies are trying to understand and figure out what zero trust is and what it is not for them. So as you're coming in, could you talk to that piece, what zero trust is and is not?
As I've talked to several agencies about that, multiple obviously, but some agencies have taken the perspective of, yeah, we already do this. It's it's defense in depth, or it is or it is the aspect of what zero trust ultimately is, which is protecting of the data. So then there's the definition of, well, what is data? What's my intellectual property from an agency perspective? And then comes the aspect of even defense in depth. That definition varies from person to person. It could be, vendor variety. It could, so that, putting in two different vendor firewalls is one definition of defense in depth, depending upon your historical experience. But the other is, how do I look at it from more of a north-south perspective and looking at evaluations or checks and balances of different technologies throughout. And so it really is a challenge for understanding what data do I have? What is the requirement? Is it data at rest, data in motion? Is it all of the above? Is it the functionality of IoT devices within my environment? And is that considered data? And it's nebulous for many organizations. So they have to evaluate, what does this really mean for me, and what is of critical importance that I need to focus on first? The one I like to do analogies, and one of the analogies for a lot of this relative to zero trust and identifying the limiters is, we don't post the firemen outside the door waiting to smell smoke. We have, within our offices, we have fire detection and prevention systems to protect resources and people and all of the facilities, but we don't take the same approach to our networks. And that's something we should do. That aspect of being able to control and contain access to information down to the source of where that information is of critical importance. And organizations are still trying to figure that out.
That definitely, gives a great overview of some of those challenges that exist. I think when agencies are coming up with plans, it's not only knowing what approach to take and identifying what data needs to be protected. It's a one size doesn't fit all. I mean, I love the analogy of the fire suppression, or the fire detection, fire suppression systems. Those types of protections. It's a great way to articulate how the appropriate level of visibility and automation can support reacting to a particular action, right? However, that one action may not be appropriate for every type of application, every person or mission that's out there today. So each agency, it's very important, especially if you want to be conscious of budget, right? And only spend the money where you absolutely need to spend that amount of money, is to truly understand those precious nuggets of data, the applications and how efficient they need to be versus how protected they need to be with regards to the criticality of that data that is available through those applications, and ensuring that whatever plans are put forward from a technology perspective to support those truly align to what those needs are. And that way you can prioritize to ensure that as the budget money comes available, that you're able to secure those precious assets first, and then move forward with expanding that approach, the zero trust approach, across the landscape, to ensure that that not only the data and the assets themselves protected, but also that the threat landscape itself is also well managed and contained, and the appropriate visibility, right? Those sensors being able to smell and determine whether or not fire is actually there, or whether smoke or any other type of contaminant in the area. Make sure that visibility is available to you so that you can sift through that information and get the right understanding of what's happening, how to react to it.
And we'll go back to those budget challenges and the challenges of prioritizing. But, I'm thinking about successful agencies, and, it's, we kind of touched on it, but it all depends on how the maturity of their plan and how adaptable their infrastructure is. And the ones that have been successful, they've been able to embrace that the cloud. But of course, as agencies are moving to that hybrid environment, with that come the challenges of like visibility and understanding the resources. And as those challenges start to present themselves, what can agencies do to address that piece?
I think the plan is incredibly important to help support that effort, right? Because without an understanding of what the objectives is, doesn't really matter whether it's private infrastructure, private cloud, or public cloud. You need to understand, what are the controls that you need to have in place? What's the level of visibility that needs to be in place in order to make sure that that happens? As long as there is that ordered and well-constructed plan, you can assess the environments, right? And determine who can fulfill or what platforms can fulfill those needs. Can they do it in a consolidated fashion? Can you minimize the number of tools to simplify the management plane itself and how the controls are implemented across those various hybrid environments, if you will, and make sure that when you're approaching meeting those goals and meeting those objectives, you do so thoughtfully, right? And ensuring that as you reach out to the vendor community, as you reach out to and interact with the engineering teams on how to pull the resources together to make those changes or to augment the environment to meet those needs. Just using that thoughtful and prioritized approach and ensuring that those steps are methodical, they are well thought out, and that the ability to execute regardless of, one day that application and that data may reside in their private data center. The next day it may reside in a public cloud. And the next month, depending on the availability and the costs associated with that service provider, it may transition to another cloud service provider. So that agility is another aspect that comes into play when it comes to dealing with that hybrid approach.
Yeah, those are really good points. Some of the, it's interesting, some of the things that we're seeing is in the course of doing all of this is it offered agencies the ability to actually go back and, getting a clear sense on the scope of their enterprise, focusing on some aspects of good cyber hygiene, asset inventory, et cetera, because and we see this in the private sector as well, which is some aspects of our company may be going in one direction and another aspect may be going in another direction, and they don't necessarily communicate. Like, for instance, if our marketing team opens up a URL or a domain for a future event, but hasn't necessarily told our IT team that we now have this new domain that's out there, then they don't know that it needs to be watched or protected. Government is the same way, right? There are aspects that, say, the network team does to support the expanded service capabilities of the work from home employees or the, always TDY employees, or for their customers, which is in some cases the American public or the international community, et cetera. There's those aspects of things that get pushed to the cloud for all of the benefits and values of the cloud, but that visibility, the instrumentation around that is sometimes lost for the rest of the organization. And so there are some aspects where where security is now driving with network teams, with infrastructure teams, the ability to have a teaming approach to going forward with a lot of these things so that we understand what's being deployed, where it's being deployed, and getting these assets. There are some agencies that have hundreds of locations across the US, remote offices, et cetera, and with varying levels of infrastructure capabilities at each of those locations, or they may have their own offshoots of network access depending upon their mission set. For attributable or non-attributable networks, et cetera, that don't have the same level of protections as the rest of the organization. So there's that. The second aspect of that is from a priority point of view, one of the key factors that or agencies should consider is, kind of going back to the aspect of the previous analogy. If there's a fire in a trash can and that, or you have some, ingredients for a fire in a trash can, the oily rags in your shop or whatever, we're not focusing on that per the perspective because it's not on fire today. And the cyber aspect of that is we know that threat actors have been leveraging things like DNS for exploitation of networks for years and years and years. But that has always been a focus of the network team rather than the security team as far as control and applicability. Our biggest challenge with agencies is if you know that the front door on your house is broken or can be turned in a certain way that unlocks it, why are you not fixing it? Why is that not a priority for you? And so we need to get better understanding of the realm of the possible from a threat actor perspective so that it drives change more rapidly.
Also, as we're moving towards this approach, hybrid approach, obviously the biggest challenge of any project is integrating all of those different technologies. That's the hardest part. And is this something that you're discussing with the agencies, and how can agencies ensure that kind of seamless integration of security tools and processes across different environments?
I think any vendor solution offers API capabilities and integration capabilities. We just launched a number of our own. We had, any vendor. I'm sure Fortinet has their own that they support natively and through API access. You can't be a solution provider without being part of the solution. So we can't lock out other vendor capabilities. Where the real limitation comes into play, and it kind of goes back to the first question, and the answer around zero trust is developing your plan of what that means to you, but that also inclusive of that is, like, say, from a network management perspective and a security visibility and control perspective, you need to have an execution plan, a playbook. How do I react and how do I do, what do I respond to and how do I proactively do this, that, or the other? And then you can design your infrastructure in a way and leverage those integrations that we already support in a way that makes more sense. And really that is an aspect of, and the limitation for many agencies is not necessarily on the integration piece, it's on the orchestration piece. It's being able to take those actionable playbooks, those things that you can automate in a series of events that make your collective jobs more effective and be able to do your gray matter decision making in rapid time rather than doing something the way we did it, say, in the 90s.
Yeah, I think to kind of add to that, it's as an agency works along that plan and helps develop that plan, it's an understanding of meeting certain levels of maturity. You have to progress your way through, right? It's one thing to I'll use a few simple analogies as well. Deciding what language you're going to use to communicate, right? That's foundational. That has to be part and early in the process, an established component of the plan, right? So making sure your data comes to a common repository, making sure that its format is relatively universal, so that it can be managed and culled in a common way. That you obtain the right levels of visibility to the various assets and resources that are across the infrastructure, regardless of whether they fall in certain silos of management realms or not. It all needs to be coordinated. So it all kind of points back to that plan, developing those foundational elements, and then starting to build the maturity levels on top of it. I love the eventual goal that Chris mentioned of being able to take that take that telemetry, use some logic and understanding of how to react to that environment, and put machines in place to help automate and make that function happen at machine speed versus rely on human resources to have to respond to those types of events, because that's really where the power of today's and where the power of the future offerings that are going to be available can really be leveraged moving forward in this architecture. But again, those foundations have to be very solid in order for those other things to work. We as an organization, with a lot of tools that we make available to support various access of or aspects of the network and approach to security within an infrastructure, and pre-integration is table stakes, like Chris said, but we also take that extra step to ensure that we have an ecosystem of partners and other vendors, and support as many standard interfaces so that we can assure that when we're part of a solution, we can be a participating part, an involved part of that. So again, it's driving through that plan and assuring that you can address those levels of maturity over time to get to that eventual. Well, I don't necessarily know that zero trust is ever there's an end to the process. I think it's always an evolutionary improvement that needs to be done. There's no singular platform that delivers it all, and there's no completely desired end state other than just moving forward and continuing to iterate and evolve that environment.
Yeah, and I would circle back on one aspect of that, and I completely agree. I've heard people like at RSA, will come up to us and talk, and they say, "Well, we are zero trust." No, you're not. No, you're a component. But that being said, there's one aspect that I see that is a fundamental challenge, which is a little bit of, and this will be an unpopular opinion, even though it is very true, which is fiefdoms, right? You've got different aspects of you've got teams who are stakeholders. They need to be able to articulate what they need so that the people responsible for providing those functions can select solutions that provide that. We need the ability to get data from this to come into our SIM. We need the ability to push data out and make threat intelligence actionable in these different technology sector, areas, whether it's a secure web gateway or firewall, et cetera, or EDR, any of that. There's a fundamental lack of communication relative to understanding what should I be able to see, what should I be able to know, and what should I be able to action on. And that, in concert with what Bill talked about, with being able to make sure you have the right data in the right format that makes it all actionable, is really integral to this. And the final piece is, each of us vendors, we have some level of professional services, but there are also systems integrators that are experts in this as well, that can help agencies walk the path and be more effective. It just takes money.
Which is, I wanted to pull that thread because agencies are being pulled in different directions. And of course, with all sorts of challenges like budget limitations as just one example, what are some of the ways that you're seeing agencies are prioritizing what's more important as they are working to, address and, as they're working to meet the deadlines? And also, what should they consider as they're balancing all of those things?
I think it can come down to kind of focusing on those initial aspects of how to build those solid foundations, right? And getting some of that that infrastructure a little bit more efficient, a little bit more potentially, programmable, accessible, providing better visibility. That those components that are going to be valuable as the level of interrogation of the environment, the sharing of information, and the extension of control start to come into play as you further your maturity model associated with zero trust. We've been working with a number of agencies, many of them relatively large and distributed agencies that are trying to get a handle on the fact that because they are relatively large and very diverse as far as the number and the location of their actual assets and resources across the U.S. That they need to have a much better and more flexible infrastructure upon which to work. So, looking at alternative access media and how to interleave that with the traditional IT infrastructure that they already have in place, potentially capping the spend on some of those things, maybe growing it more informed, if you will. Yes, there is a place for the high dollar transport mechanisms, but let's make sure we use those where it's most appropriate for the applications. And again, it comes down to having that good plan and being able to drive those initiatives associated with that. But if you get a handle on some of those things and you bring in those additional media types and can get some efficiencies of scale associated with that, associated with some of those more modern technologies that some of the newer guidance from and policy information from government is allowed to come into the infrastructure, into the environment. That definitely sets the stage for potentially some more funding, or when the funding the purse strings get tightened a little bit, that they've got some flexibility with regards to how to use those new funds to further that cause and move themselves further along that path of maturity of their environment.
Yeah, I like that. And as you were explaining that, I got a visual. If you recall the Tom and Jerry cartoons, and sometimes you see, Tom the cat, where the front end of him runs and he starts stretching out because the tail end is still around the corner, right? And it's still waiting to catch up. And that's some of the challenge that a lot of the agencies have is, as I even see it. I saw it yesterday. I was with our internal team and we were going over our system security plan for CMMC. And so we were evaluating and going through, making sure everything was still accurate from when we did this last year. And there are legacy things in there, and CMMC is new for the vendor community. But there were things in there like, how do you mark your media? Okay, well, when's the last time any of us have burned a CD-ROM, right? When's the last time that we've had, any level of like floppy disk media? But there are still references to those things in regulatory guidance. And that is that tail end of Tom the cat, right? Is not catching up with the state of the current or even the future state of that. And this is part of the challenge that organizations are facing is, how do I catch up, maintain currency, get the visibility, understand all of that? And in reality, what it comes down to is it's a risk management discussion for organizations. Where do I evaluate? What are my requirements? What are my compliance necessities versus nice to haves? And rack and stack, do functional gap analysis, not just on my feature set and my capabilities, but also on what the threat actor is doing, and be able to understand how they're doing it, because all of this zero trust doesn't matter if I do what I think is right as it applies to me, but I don't take into account how the threat actor is targeting the government. That has to be the other side of the equation that has to be balanced out. And hopefully our side is stronger than that side. But if we don't take into account what threat actors are doing and how they're attacking, and even things like phishing is still a very common and very effective tactic that's still effectively getting through all of the infrastructure we put in place. Secure web gateways, mail filters, firewalls, EDR, et cetera, and it's still being effective. Well, then what we're doing isn't working. And we need to evaluate that not just from a performance and network availability point of view, but if you have a CISSP, you understand confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's not or. Network and security need to work in concert.
All right, great information there. We have a couple minutes left. So as we're wrapping this up, any takeaways that you want to leave people with?
I think kind of reiterating a lot of the points that were made here today is, first, the planning piece, I think, is incredibly crucial, and understanding that that plan is going to come from a variety of resources across the agency. It's not just going to come from the security team. It's not just going to come from the networking team. The data owners, the application developers, all of the aspects of how the data is stored, how the data is manipulated, who the data is for, how they access it, what is the level of criticality associated with it. All of those aspects, they're not just going to come from a singular source. They need to come from many places. And that plan of attack is incredibly important to pull together and try and break down a lot of those silos with regards to communication associated with how to put that plan in place. I think that's one of the fundamental tenets that you don't start with that, then your journey towards zero trust is going to be hampered. And then knowing that it is that journey, not a sprint, and you have to carry that tail along with you as well. And be thoughtful, be very thoughtful with regards to each one of those steps, and continue to iterate and ensure that as you deploy capabilities, as you implement procedures, you also review them to ensure that they are meeting the objectives that you set up front, and be open to the idea that there are potentially other perspectives that can help improve those approaches, and to take that additional perspective and input to help further and evolve your plan as things move along.
There's a couple of fundamental things that, obviously getting the teams that have stakeholder value, stakeholder chair to talk together, to work together, to understand the mutual requirements, so that when the network team deploys out a vendor solution, that they've taken into account the security requirements, so that they pick the best vendor solution for that. But also leveraging AI, at the vastness of data, the variety of data types, and all of the components, and just the span of the enterprise requires the level of AI to get an understanding of what data is out there, what it means to me as a data owner, as an enterprise owner, et cetera, and be able to take action on that. And Bill's right, it is a journey, and there are times when you walk, and then there are times like when the bear comes out of the woods to chase you. Might be a Russian bear, or a panda comes out of the woods. You're going to have to run, and for a bit of time to get away from it. You don't want to make yourself, to the point of not taking into account, I'm walking through bear territory. That whole point of that is know the other side. We do a really good aspect. It's, I look at my door over here, and I've used this analogy before. I could change the lock to a new RFID biometric access lock, but 4 inches away is a glass window that can be broken by a rock. And so you have to take into account, how do threat actors do what they do so that I can better secure my environment. And that's critical to it.
Yeah, if I put one little finishing touch on that, I think the concept you brought up with regards to AI and leveraging it across, the various formats of telemetry, and also to help speed response as well. I think it's highly critical, not just for speed of action and the ability to respond and react to the raw amount of data that's being handled or that needs to be handled. It's that we know, and we've been dealing with for many years, this talent gap, this inability for the workforce to produce and the entire environment, if you will, to produce enough resources of the level of competency to really fulfill all the needs when it comes to being able to actually address all of these needs. So getting partnerships with your integrators, getting partnerships with your vendors, getting the knowledge out there, and then leveraging these valuable tools to help scale out those common practices and those best practices as things move along. I think that's going to be a recurring theme that we're going to need to stay on top of and need to leverage technology in support of, just because of the challenges associated with keeping those gaps in knowledge up to snuff and aware of the types of things that Chris brought to bear.
Yeah, we'll never replace the human in the loop. However, I think the last metric I saw was like 4 million worldwide shortfall in cybersecurity alone, and throwing bodies at the problem is not the solution. It's just not the solution. So I agree with you completely.
So much to dive into here, and I wanted to dedicate a lot more time to leveraging AI and how that complements and fits into all these efforts of creating flexibility and security. But thank you both so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'd like to thank today's guest, Chris Usserman, the Chief Technologist for Infoblox Public Sector, and Bill Lemons, the Director of Systems Engineering for Fortinet Federal. I'm reporter Anastasia Obis, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cyber Leaders Exchange.